This video is going to be about different types of outdoor shelters and how to select the best one for you. My name is Brian and you're watching Survival on Purpose. Welcome back to Survival on Purpose. Thanks for joining me. So as I said, today's video is going to be about different types of shelter for the outdoors and some of the information hopefully that'll help you decide which type's best for you. So we're going to talk about basically about tarps and tents. We talk about the different materials that they may be made of, what the advantages and disadvantages of each type are, and some of the construction types, and just some general things to look for to hopefully help you when you're selecting a shelter for the outdoors. The first and simplest shelter that you can possibly use is just a tarp. Tarps come in a lot of different sizes, shapes, and materials, but they all have basically the same function, and they're just a flat piece of material that you can hang or tie or support in all kinds of different configurations to keep the weather off of you, basically. And tents, on the other hand, are generally three-dimensional structures that have at least sides and top, and sometimes they have a floor and doors and windows and stuff. And they're a more similar type environment to, say, a house or a shed or some sort of structure than opposed to just a tarp. So basically the difference is tarps are pretty much, you can set them up how you want. Tents generally have a pre-configured structure that they're designed to be set up in a certain way, and that's the way you set them up. So the number one question you might be asking, so really and truly, why do you need a shelter? And that may sound like a stupid question, but you know, I learned in school, and I don't remember what class, but one of the basic human needs is shelter. And one of the main purposes for a shelter is to protect and preserve and maintain your core body temperature. You know, the human body has been designed to operate at a very precise temperature range, and if your inner body temperature gets too high or too low, it's not a good thing. You could die. So one of the purposes of a shelter is to maintain a microclimate to keep you from getting too hot or too cold. And it also kind of gives you some comfort because it protects you from the elements, keeps you from getting rained on, snowed on. It can provide shade in the hot sun. A lot of different reasons like that even beyond just pure safety, just for comfort. And in addition, some shelters can provide you some privacy, especially a tent can provide you privacy for like changing clothes and different things like that. So that's some of the reasons you might need a shelter. Now, tents are really, really popular shelters. And actually the oldest recorded instance, I think, that we have of a tent is probably in the Bible. And Abraham lived in a tent. At least from what we read, Abraham lived in a tent his entire life. Actually, the first church or tabernacle was in a tent. Moses' tabernacle was a tent. It was a big, nice, fancy tent, but it was a tent. And today we still use tents a lot. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the tents and tarps and some different types of camping arrangements and just ways to get a good night's sleep and to shelter yourself from the elements. So I will quit rambling and let's take a closer look at some of those different choices. Okay, so like I said, the most basic type of shelter is a tarp. This one happens to be a USMC surplus military tarp. So one of the advantages of a tarp is it's very simple. A lot of different ways to set it up. So this is just a really, really simple, probably the simplest way to set up a tarp. It's just like a short lean-to. So some of the advantages of a tarp are, again, it's very simple to set up, very easy to take up and down, very versatile in the way you can set it up, and sometimes some tarps are pretty cheap. You can get a tarp for $10 that it may not last forever, but you know, if you're looking for a cheap shelter to take out in the woods for a few days, $10 tarp will work just fine. So some of the disadvantages of a tarp are it's not as closed in. It doesn't provide you any protection at all from insects and bugs and mosquitoes and stuff. And it can be heavy. If you get a bigger tarp, it can be pretty heavy. And it can be a challenge to keep it warm in the winter. But there are some ways around that too. So anyway, that's the basic idea of a tarp. It's the most simple shelter there is. Let's take a quick look at a different use for a tarp, and then we'll talk about tents. Okay, so this is a different setup for a tarp, and this is actually one of my favorite uses for a tarp, and that's to cover a hammock. I love sleeping in hammocks. I usually sleep in a hammock. I have a different type of hammock that I use a lot. It's called a Hennessy hammock, and it actually is kind of like a cross between a tent and a hammock. I did a previous video about that, and I will show you a clip now in just a minute about that. But first, so I like sleeping in a hammock, but hammocks are not very protected from the weather, obviously. So if you hang a tarp over the hammock, it's just a really good use for a tarp. It's a really versatile shelter, and you can just get in your hammock and go to sleep. But you don't want to watch me sleeping, so why don't we take a quick look at the Hennessy hammock video to show you what it is. It's basically a cross between a tent and a hammock. It's got a mosquito netting on it, and it's got a tarp that's attached to it, so it's a self-contained system. Really great. You might want to check that one out. Okay, so let's talk about tents. The tents come in a lot of different styles. Tents come in a lot of different materials. Those are the big things you're going to have to decide on when you're selecting a tent. Okay, so tents are made out of several different materials. The first being maybe canvas. Canvas is typically used on long-term type tents that are going to have to stand the test of time. They're any kind of reenactment, or from historical perspective, that's where you're going to find a lot of canvas tents. Actually, the Boy Scout camps throughout America use canvas tents for their summer camps because they last a long time. They're very solid, and they'll accept a lot of abuse. They're also very expensive and very heavy, extremely heavy compared to more modern materials. So you're not going to find the average weekend camper or backpacker using canvas tents anymore. It doesn't happen, and it's probably not what you're going to want to select unless you're just going for the historical type tent, unless you're looking to put up a long-term tent too. Okay, so the other two very popular materials that tents are made out of these days are nylon and polyester. Both very popular. Nylon is generally a little more expensive, and polyester is the lesser cost of the material. And nylon is stronger and lighter, and it's typically coated, but with something to make it UV protected and waterproof. Polyester costs less and is more resistant to the UV rays of the sun. Also, when it gets wet, nylon will tend to stretch and sag because it absorbs some water, where polyester doesn't do that. Polyester will stay tight. So those are the kind of pros and cons. Typically, nylon is going to be a more expensive tent because but it's also going to be lighter. You'll find in any kind of backpacking or camping gear, modern gear anyway, that the lighter something is, generally the more it costs. There's an inverse relationship between cost and weight, and that's just the way it is. So, but nylon or polyester are typically treated with different things to make them UV resistant or water resistant. And some of the things they treat them with, especially nylon, is polyurethane or silicone. Polyurethane is basically the lesser cost of the treatment, which means it weighs more, is heavier, and maybe doesn't do quite as good a job. Silicone, on the other hand, is more expensive, does a better job. So just to kind of recap between nylon and polyester. Nylon typically is lighter and stronger, costs more money, and the top of the line is going to be Sil-Ny or silicone coated nylon. So if you're looking for the best possible modern tent material, it's going to be nylon coated with silicone, Sil-Ny. Typically lower cost tents may be made out of polyester. One term you may hear a lot when talking about different types of fabric is denier. And denier just basically means that it's the weight. The bigger the number, the stronger the material, the heavier and the stronger the material. So 500 denier nylon is going to be a lot heavier and stronger than 200 denier nylon, and vice versa. Another word you may hear is ripstop. And what ripstop means is, and you've seen the little checkerboard pattern, especially on a lot of nylon fabrics, maybe thin nylon fabrics. Ripstop means that it's got these little reinforcing strands woven through it in a grid pattern to prevent it from tearing. And that's what that's for. It just makes it strengthens the fabric. Okay, so first thing I want to talk about is tent construction, and we're going to look at the floors first. Okay, so there are a couple different kinds of tent floors, and we're going to take a look at the lower cost one first. Tents basically come with two different type floors. This particular material that you can see is woven polyethylene. You'll notice it looks a lot like the blue kind of lower price tarps you can buy, because that's essentially the same kind of material. You can see the weave pattern in it, and it's got this coating on it that makes it waterproof. This is the lower cost type of tent floor. One of the problems with this floor is over time it begins to deteriorate and the coating can start flaking off. And you know, we used to have some tents like this in my oldest son's Boy Scout troop. They had a blue floor and we wake up in the morning covered in blue spots, so it was not a pleasant thing. But this can be a very good way to make a floor. You just got to know that it's probably not going to last as long as a nylon floor. However, one of the advantages of this floor is it's probably a little tougher as far as puncture resistant and scrapes and abrasion than a nylon floor. Another type of feature you may hear about is called a bathtub floor. You can see this is not a bathtub floor. This is just a flat tarp and the sides of the tent are sewn to it at the bottom. The bathtub floor is going to rise up on the sides and we'll take a look at that in just a minute. Obviously a bathtub floor is going to be more water resistant because this seam here is a place for water to seep into the tent. Okay, so this is a little different kind of tent. This is a smaller tent. And we'll take a look at the floor on this tent. This tent has two differences in the floor between this tent and the one we just looked at. This tent has a nylon floor and it has a bathtub floor. So let's get a closer look at that right now. Okay, aside from the fact that this floor is wet because my kids left the tent open in the rain, this is an example of both a nylon floor. You can see that the floor material is not the woven polyethylene, but it's the same material as the sides of the tent. It's nylon. You can also see that there's no two-piece floor here. This is called a bathtub floor, which means the floor of the tent rolls up just like a bathtub to prevent water from coming in. So there's no seam right at the very bottom where water comes in. Usually a bathtub floor is going to be preferable to a non-bathtub floor. Okay, another big difference that you'll find between tents is freestanding versus non-freestanding. That's just exactly what it sounds like. Now typically in bigger tents like the one over here, you're not going to find a freestanding typically in a larger tent. But a lot of times small tents won't be freestanding either, especially little one-man backpacker tents. The difference is, I guess, a freestanding tent does not have to be staked down. You can pick it up and move it, whereas a non-freestanding tent is got to be staked. The actual stakes in the walls and the tension on the walls from the stakes provide some of the support for the tent. So we're going to walk over here and take a look at a freestanding tent just so you can get an idea exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is a freestanding tent. Basically means it's self-supporting. You can pick it up and do this with it. Set it back down. One good thing about a freestanding tent is if you get a little dirt in and dust, you can unzip the door, pick it up, and shake it out. Set it back down. It helps if you have two people. But you can move these tents around really easily and pretty quickly. And it's just a real solid design. Because you're probably going to want to stake it down anyway, because in a high wind, this thing transforms from a freestanding tent to a tumbleweed tent. So let's take a look real quickly at a non-freestanding tent. Similar design. Okay, so we try to get this whole tent in the view in the camera, so we got it backed up. That's why I'm so far away. Don't know if it's working or not, but this is an example of a non-freestanding tent. It's very similar. It's modern construction. It's a nylon tent, got a big Rainfly, similar kind of poles, but it requires the corners to be staked out to provide the tension on the poles to give the tent support. So you can't just pick this one up and move it. That's the difference. Like I said, generally larger tents, this is a, 8 or 12 person tent. I don't know, it's a big tent, 3-room tent. They're not going to be freestanding. So the last thing I want to show you about major differences in tents are going to be the poles. Okay, so this is a more older traditional style pole configuration that has steel poles, and they basically stretch out and provide the structure for the tent. These poles come apart into individual pieces, and it is kind of like putting a puzzle together to set the tent up. So as an example, let's give you an example. You can see that these things collapse and they come apart in different pieces. So you have to keep all these pieces figured out. And luckily, this tent and most of them have a little instructions sewn into the bag to show you which pole goes where. And the poles are generally labeled, so you got to keep up with all that. But then you stretch them out and tension the tent. But there is a better way. Okay, so these are a little different design on these poles. I'll just pop them off here and show you. Okay, so these fiberglass poles have what's called a shock cord inside of them. So basically they just fold up together, and very small package, but yet they stay together in one piece pole. So you don't have to figure out which piece goes where. And that gives me a good opportunity to talk about another great feature that you're going to want to look for on your tents. Okay, so another thing I want to show you about is the way the poles connect to the tent. There are a couple different ways. The way that I like uses these pole clips. And what the pole clips do is they allow you just to set your poles up and then clip the tent to it, and they support the tent. Some tents have a big fabric sleeve that you got to slide the poles through, and they support the tent. Both work pretty well. I just like these better because I think they're faster. It's not a deal killer if it's got a sleeve here, but you might want to look for these clips. They just make it really easy, quick setup. You can set your poles in the corner at the top and just clip them up and you're done. It's just really fast, especially if you're by yourself. Okay, another thing that you want to be aware of is some different tent features. Most tents feature a removable separate Rainfly, and in this case this one does. So you can see in the summertime when the weather's fine, or in the fall, whatever, no rain, you can take it off and get a good breeze through there, get some really good air circulation. In bad weather, you can put a Rainfly on, and Rainflies come in several different configurations. This one's a pretty simple one. You just sit it on the tent. Okay, so here's this same tent with the Rainfly installed. You can see that it covers up all the windows. It still has enough of an air gap between here that you can get some circulation, but it's not going to be as much circulation as it without the Rainfly. But it will keep the rain out, hopefully, if the door's shut. Okay, so we're here inside of this gigantic Browning tent, but I just want to show you some of the features. First of all, you may see a term called a gear loft. This is a gear loft. It's basically a platform, a little net that hangs from the top of the tent that gives you somewhere to store extra stuff. There'll also be some pockets on the side. I kind of call these my nightstand, chest of drawers. You can always, good tents will have a couple of those in there. As you can see from the side of this tent, this is not a bathtub floor design. So this tent is going to be the stakes are on the corner, so it's not really, it's got a seam right at the floor level. So it's not optimal, but it'll suffice. You can see these panels hang up here. And one thing you may hear about is called a vestibule. This tent doesn't have one, but basically what a vestibule is an extension of the Rainfly beyond the tent, so it gives you a little dry area to sit your pack, your shoes, or whatever, to keep them out of the direct rain. Doesn't keep any water running on the ground off of them, but it keeps them out of the rain. So that's a vestibule. You'll see that a lot where the Rainfly goes out beyond, typically around the door, beyond the footprint of the tent itself. Speaking of footprints, you may also see some footprints advertised. Basically what that is just a type piece of material that's designed to fit underneath the tent, the same size as the tent, to protect the floor of the tent from wear and tear. It's a good idea if you're going to buy an expensive tent, or even a cheap tent for that matter, to get a footprint, or even, I always just use a tarp, to be honest with you. I'll buy a $5 tarp from Walmart and put it under my tent when I set it up, kind of like you saw on the other small tent, just a big blue tarp. They wear out, tear up, buy another one for $5. Not a big deal, but it'll protect the floor of your tent. Okay, so we took a look at some different tents, different tarps. So kind of wrap all this up. The couple more things I just want to talk to you real quickly. Zippers are really important on tents. You want to make sure you have good quality zippers. Pretty much any tent you buy nowadays is going to have mosquito netting and windows and zippered doors, and you're going to have a flap that zippers over the door, over the window. You can let up or down, you know, to keep the rain in, rain out. And so those are, again, pretty common. You know, some tents have one door, some tents have 2 or 3 doors. You know, so those are, everything like that you add to it is going to increase the cost of it. I'll also tell you this, in my opinion, you get what you pay for with most things, in tents especially. If you want to get a really good tent that's going to last you a really long time, you know, I would stick with the name brand. I've got these Boy Scout tents here, the little one we looked at over there. It's a Eureka. I've had those tents now with Boy Scouts using them for 15 years, and they're still going strong. So they weren't that expensive, but 130, 140 bucks for a 4-man tent. Which brings me to another point. If it says 4-man tent, that means 4 really close friends can sleep in that tent. I think 4-man tents are probably best used for 2 people. That's just kind of the way I figure it. You know, if it's a 7x7 tent, that's going to be 2 people and maybe a little bit of gear. you start trying to get more people in that, you're going to be very uncomfortable, and your boots are going to be wet if it rains because they're going to be sitting outside. The other thing you want to look at is center height. Just those are specs on every tent. Just bear in mind, you want to at least be able to sit up if it's a smaller tent. See how tall you are sitting up. You want to be able to sit up comfortably without, having to bend over the entire time you're in the tent. Also look at the vertical angle of the walls. If it's like this, the center height is not really going to help you much because there's going to be one little point where you have that much room. The more vertical the walls are, the more usable space you have. One thing you want to do is, notice some of these tents are kind of damp out here. I set them up, it was dry. Now it's rained on them. You don't want to put them up wet. Just like anything, if you put it up wet, it's subject to mildew and rot. So you always want to not do that. One other thing about tents, if it's raining and it's wet, you generally want to avoid touching the sides of it because that would just cause the water to kind of wick through a lot of times, and it'll create a drip or a leak where there wasn't one before. Okay, so that's almost it about tents. I do want to talk real quick about a couple of safety things because I think it's really important. As you may know, I'm a Boy Scout leader, and I've been in the Boy Scouts for a long time, been involved with the Boy Scouts for a long time. And as sad as it is to hear about, hardly a year goes by without hearing about somebody died from asphyxiation or carbon monoxide poisoning in a tent. It's really, really a sad thing, but it's important to talk about. It's really, really important that you don't burn any kind of fuel appliance in the tent. Not only is it a fire hazard, these things are made out of nylon and polyester, which are both synthetic materials that burn. They're both, I think, petroleum type products. So they'll burn, you can really die and have a big problem with burning, and the fumes, if they are on fire, are very poisonous. But in addition to that, when you burn, especially charcoal or gas type stuff, propane, carbon monoxide is a byproduct of combustion, and you can go to sleep and not wake up. And it happens way, way too often from people that should know better. So I don't want anybody that watches this video to ever have that problem. I'm just telling you, it's cold, no matter how cold it is, how tempting it is. I know they sell these tent heaters. They sell them for tent heaters. I wouldn't use them. I don't use them. I've been camping for years and years and years and years and years. I don't use them. Buy a better sleeping bag. Just do something. It's not worth the risk of your life. Okay, I hope I've beat that enough. Never have flames. Always have adequate insulation, and as far as flames go, one other thing is just be careful around campfires. That's one of the advantages of a big old heavy canvas tent, is they're a little more resistant to catching on fire and embers and popping and burning, especially if you're burning pine. Pine pops and throws out embers. You don't want to put a campfire too close to a synthetic tent because you could wake up with your tent on fire. So just a couple of safety tips. I don't want to keep rambling on, so I want to wrap this up. Okay, so this has been a quick video, or maybe not so quick video, about different types of shelters, mostly about tents, different types of construction, different types of material, just some of the information hopefully that'll help you make a decision if you're trying to buy a tent or a shelter for your outdoor camping or survival or whatever it may be. I hope this has been helpful. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing to Survival on Purpose. Thanks for clicking the thumbs up if you like this video. Let Google know you like outdoor videos. Share it with your friends if you think they'll like it. And if you'd like to support this channel, just check out the Amazon links below. I'd really appreciate it. Once again, my name is Brian. You're watching Survival on Purpose. Remember, survival's not an accident, so be prepared. See you next time.